Welcome again, dear friends, to our satsang today. This is the third talk I am giving on this topic. I've called this topic the way of the Sant, Sant Marga. And I see that there's a few of you who have joined us this morning for the first time. And what I am doing is looking at the virtues that are exemplified in the life of the Sant, those who are regarded as embodying goodness in our tradition. I have chosen to look at the virtuous life of the Sant because the Sant is not a renunciant. The Sant is not someone who has turned away from the world, but the Sant is someone who is very actively engaged in the world. The Sant can be a family person, a person with a professional life, a life of involvement in community. And I think that the ideal of the Sant is relevant to all of us. So I share my understanding of the virtues of the Sant and the attractiveness of these virtues to me. And it is always in your hands to decide if these virtues are meaningful to you and if you think that they are worthy of consideration and of emulation. I just make an offering of these virtues to you. So for a quick summary, in the first lecture, I discussed a very beautiful comparison that the poet Sant Tulsidas offered to us, where he compared the Sant to the sandal tree. Even when the sandal tree is cut by an axe, the poet said, the sandal tree gives its fragrance to the axe. The axe returns from the act of cutting the tree, saturated with the delightful, with the beautiful fragrance of the sandal wood. In other words, the sandal tree never wavers from its good nature, from its virtuous nature. It gives generously of its fragrance, even to those who are not kind. The axe always comes away with a fragrance that it didn't have before. The cruelty of the axe does not have the power to change the nature of the sandal tree to exude its beautiful smell. In a similar way, I said, a Sant does not become unjust because others are unjust to him or her, does not hate because others hate, does not speak words in anger because others do so. The goodness of the Sant is not changed by the absence of goodness in others. The Sant consistently radiates love and goodness to all. This was the essence of my first talk. And in the second talk, I focused on another beautiful quality of the Sant, described in one line, which we examined in depth. Para dukha dukha, sukha sukha. Para dukha dukha, sukha sukha. In this line, the Sant is described as one who is unhappy when others are unhappy or in sorrow. Para dukha dukha, and happy when others are happy. Sukha sukha. And I illustrated this by referring to the great Gujarati poet Narsi Mehta, who gave us one of the most exquisite compositions describing the goodness of the Sant. But in this poem, he asked, who is the worshipper of God, Vaishnava Janato Tene Kahiye? And he answered very much like Tulsidas does, Pira Parai Jani Re, one who knows the pain of others. Para Dukha, Dukha. And knowing this pain then expresses itself in an outward action to relieve suffering. So Narsi Mehta suggests that the Sant finds delight and meaning in seeing others free from suffering and would engage in action to overcome suffering in others without any thought of reward or praise. Man abhiman na ane re. What is clear in both of these verses that we examined is that the growth in spirituality, becoming a Sant, which I hope is an ideal for all of us, that this growth is not a growth in indifference or in an uncaring attitude towards our fellow beings. Spirituality is not withdrawal from the world. It is not about building an unemotional wall around oneself that enables one to be unaffected by the condition of others. The way of the Sant is para dukha, dukha, sukha, sukha, identification with others in suffering and in joy. And so this calls upon us, it invites us to expand our hearts, to see our connectedness with others. For many of us, the circle of concern, para dukha, dukha, sukha, sukha, or the circle of love may extend only to our immediate families. It's a small circle. We are moved by their joys and their sorrows. For others, this circle may be larger. It may include members of their religious group, their ethnic group, or even the nation. And there is nothing wrong in loving one's family, one's fellow citizens, or those with whom one shares a common culture. But love should not stop there. Spiritual growth is the expansion of the heart in love. And the ideal that the Sant offers to us, or the ideal that the Sant holds before us, the possibility that the Sant holds before us, is growth in a love that is without boundaries, a love that is not defined or circumscribed by geography, by nation, by language, by culture, by ethnicity. This is the ideal to which we must grow. This is the ideal to which we must progress. And this is the ideal that is also held before us in the Upanishads. There is that famous verse that is often quoted, and I'm sure many of you we are familiar with one line of that verse that comes from the Maha Upanishad, the 6th chapter. And this is the line, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the regarding of the world as one's own family. But the entire verse is very insightful because it begins with the line, Ayam Bandhur, Ayam Neti, Gananam Laghu Chetasam. Ayam Bandhuhu, Ayam Na iti, Ganana Laghu Chetasam. And so the Rishi says in this verse that the one who thinks that this is the one that I care about, and these are the ones I don't care about, one who differentiates, one whose love is narrow and circumscribed. This demonstrates, this is an example of a constricted heart, laghu chetasam, a narrowed heart that differentiates between caring for some and not caring about others. Udara charitanam to vasudhaiva kutumbakam. But the one whose heart is not so constricted, who doesn't have the narrow heart, regards the entire universe, vasudhaiva kutumbakam, sees the whole world as her family. So we are called to care about others, whoever they are and wherever they suffer. So for building on those two beautiful qualities of the Sant, this morning I take up a third virtue. And drawing again from the Sant character as painted or portrayed by Sant Tulsidas, this third virtue is what he describes as sama abhuta ripu. These three words, sama abhuta ripu. Ripu is an enemy. It is the same in meaning as shatru. So ripu, shatru points to an enemy. Abhuta ripu, abhuta, free from. So abhuta ripu is one who is without enemies. Abhuta ripu. I'll come back to the word sama, which precedes this expression, abhuta ripu. One who is without enemies. We have similar expressions in other texts, and you may recognize these texts. In the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, for example, Sri Krishna speaks of the human being who is dear to him. And in verse 13, he uses a very beautiful expression. The expression is Adveshta Sarvabhutanam. Adveshta Sarvabhutanam. So Bhutanam means all beings, Sarva, all, Bhutanam, beings. Adveshta. Adveshta means one who is without hate, one who is free from hate towards all beings, which is the same, as I would show, as Abhuta Ripu. In the same chapter, verse 18, he describes the person as Sama Shatrau Chamitrecha, one who regards as same the enemy and the friend. And we'll analyze the meaning of that. So let us focus in detail on this expression, Abhuta Ripu, one who is without enemies. I think in order to understand this quality of the Sant, a few important clarifications are needed. First, the virtues of the Sant that are described in our sacred texts by Tulsidas and others, for example, Bhagavad Gita, speak specifically to interpersonal relationships. The writers are not speaking here about relationships between nation states or even between organizations. Of course, and I want to emphasize this, I think that nation states, organizations, and institutions have a lot to learn from the way of the Sant. And states and institutions should give more thought to the practice of these virtues and ask how these virtues may be relevant to state policy and organization ideals. In relationships among states and organizations, there should also be no place for hate or for the enemy mentality, because sometimes the enemy mentality gets transmitted across generations, and this adds to the difficulties and challenges of peacemaking. So this is my first point, that Sama Abhuta Ripu speaks particularly to interpersonal relations and not relations among states, although it's relevant for those relationships as well. Secondly, the statement Abhuta Ripu, without enemies, is not a naive or unrealistic statement. We must understand that it does not deny the existence of persons who may see and who may treat the Sant as an enemy. After all, the Gita line, Sama Shatrau cha Mitrecha, acknowledges the existence of people who are hostile to the Sant by saying that the Sant is the same to friend and to enemy. So it is not denying the existence of hostile people. There is, however, an important difference. And the difference is this. Others may regard and treat the Sant as their enemy. The Sant, on the other hand, does not regard anyone as an enemy. The Sant is free from the enemy, what I will call in this talk, free from the enemy mentality. The Sant is Abhuta Ripu, free from the enemy attitude or the enemy mentality. Third, if the Sant is free from what I'm speaking about as the enemy mentality or the enemy attitude, what exactly is this attitude? What does it mean to think of another as a ripu, as a shatru, as an enemy? We know what it means to think of someone as a friend, as a mitra. A mitra is someone who desires your happiness, someone who desires your well-being. A shatru or a ripu is someone who desires to cause you pain or hurt, or who finds delight in seeing you hurt, in seeing you suffer. So an enemy is someone who is an object of hate. Dvesha. That's why Sri Krishna says, Adveshta. Advesha, Sarva Bhutanam. So when we think of someone as an enemy, we think of this person as an object of hate, an object of Dvesha. Dvesha is a mental and emotional condition of intense dislike towards another. A condition, mental and emotional, of intense dislike towards another. It is usually accompanied by anger or krodha and a desire for the humiliation of the other and his or her destruction. This is what it means to regard someone as an enemy. And this enemy disposition, this enemy attitude may be focused on individuals, but it could also be focused on groups or even on citizens of another nation. It could be transmitted, as it often is, from one generation to another. So examples of group enmity or group hatred include racism, xenophobia, dislike of those who are different, homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, Hinduphobia, and other forms of antagonism to entire groups who are seen as enemies, who are the objects of dvesha. And so while recognizing that there are persons who, for various reasons, may hate the Sant, seeing him or her as an enemy and wishing for her or his destruction or ruin, the Sant does not respond in kind. And keep in mind now the sandal tree example. It is in this sense that the Sant is said to be a bhutaripu, without enemies. So it is not that there's a complete absence of people who regard the Sant as an enemy. We're speaking about the Sant's response. The Sant does not see others with the attitude or with the disposition of an enemy. The Sant does not respond with hate to those who hate, does not have the enemy mentality towards others. So then, the important question for us, how does one become free from the enemy mentality? How does one become a bhutaripu, free from the enemy mentality? And here I'm going to give a few suggestions, all of which are drawn from the Hindu tradition. I'm not saying that these are very easy teachings to assimilate and to practice in our relationships, but this is what our tradition holds before us as aspirationally. So first, when we are gripped by dvesha, by hate for another, we usually see nothing that is worthy of respect in that person. In fact, we tend even to dehumanize the other and to see the other person, the individual or members of a group, in an entirely negative light. We will deny anything positive in the other. This is what hate, dvesha, causes in our perception of the other. Now, at the heart of the Hindu tradition is a core teaching that if you have, listened to me over these years, you would know that I always emphasize a teaching that is, for me, definitive of what it means to live this tradition. And this is the teaching that the divine exists equally in everyone and in everything. Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram. Bhagavad Gita. Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram. Every sacred text in the Hindu tradition that enunciates this teaching does it in this way, in the way that allows for no exception. Samam, in the same way, sarveshu, in all, bhuteshu, in all beings, tishtantam parameshwaram, the supreme God, parameshwaram, exists. So here is the point. Evil conduct in a human being, and there is a lot of that. Evil conduct in a human being does not dispel the divine reality present in the heart of all. Let me emphasize that. Evil conduct in a human being does not remove or dispel the divine reality present in the heart of all. Nothing is capable of expelling the divinity present in everyone. It is ignorance on our part if we fail to see this truth. So even when we must disapprove, and we have to, even when we must disapprove and condemn the conduct of another, we should not fail to see the divine reality still present in that person. And that divine reality always elicits from us an attitude of respect. Let me give you an example. And this example again comes from Sant, from his Sant Tulsidas. As he composed his great text, his magnus opum, his version of the Ramayana, which he calls the Ramcharit Manas, the lake filled with the actions of Sri Ram. At the beginning of the text, he has a very beautiful section where he expresses his reverence for different beings in the world, I would say, in the universe. What is unique about him and exceptional in this section of the Ramayana is that Tulsidas also gives his respect to the evildoers. I have not seen a verse like this in any other text. So let me just quote for you a small section of that, of his text. Just one verse. And this is a quote, English quote. Again, I greet with a sincere heart the malevolent class who are hostile without purpose, even to the friendly, to whom others' loss is their own gain, and who delight in others' desolation, and who wail over their prosperity. I greet with a sincere heart these people. Now look at his words. He is not naive about their evil characteristics. He says that they are malevolent, they are hostile without purpose, even to the friendly. They celebrate others' loss, they delight in others' desolation, they mourn over others' prosperity. So he's not simplistic or naive about evil characteristics and the pain that they inflict on others. But yet, he remarkably expresses his respect. Because, as he says at the very beginning of his text, Siya Ram mai sab jag jani, karahu pranam jor jugapani. Because he sees his beloved Ram even in them. Evil is not strong enough to dispel the divine presence in anyone. In having an attitude of respect, we are not naive, like as Tulsidas is not naive about the reality of evil and the suffering that it causes. Now, because this divine, by whatever name we call the divine in the Upanishads, the divine is spoken of as Brahman, the infinite, the limitless. This divine is the very ground of our sense of self. The very ground of the sense of I. There is no sense of I am or I exist without this divine reality. So we find that Hindu texts, like the Bhagavad Gita and others, speak interchangeably of seeing oneself in all beings and all beings in oneself, and seeing the divine in all beings and all beings in the divine. And the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita is a very beautiful example of that. In verse 29, for example, or let's even go to the earlier verse. Verse 28, Yo mam pashyati sarvatra, sarvam chamai pashyati. One who sees the divine in all and all in the divine. And then the verse, Sarva bhutastamatmanam sarva bhutani cha atmani. One who sees all in the Atman and the Atman in all. So he uses, in this text, he's using the words interchangeably, Atman and Ishvara. So why is this important? It is important because, again, in order to hate, to have the enemy attitude, to despise others, we always make the argument in one form or the other that we don't share anything with this one person or with this group. They're entirely different from us. We do not see ourselves in them or they in us. We deny any shared identity. We do not understand God in the Hindu tradition unless we understand God to be the God of all, who is present in all. God does not hate those we hate, and God does not love only those we love. So to counteract the enemy attitude, we must understand our unity, our shared identity with all beings. We exist in the same infinite divine who exists equally in everyone. Mahatma Gandhi, one of the great advocates of this teaching, wrote in his autobiography about its meaning for him, and I quote, "Man and his deed are two distinct things. Whereas a good deed should call forth approbation, and a wicked deed disapprobation, the doer of the deed, whether good or wicked, always deserves respect or pity as the case may be. Hate the sin and not the sinner is a precept which, though easy enough to understand, is rarely practiced. And that is why the poison of hatred spreads in the world." So here Gandhi is saying, in his own unique way, that we can condemn the action, but we don't have to hate the doer of the action. If it's a good deed, we should praise. If it's an evil deed, we can pity. But there's no place for hate. Secondly, how do we overcome the enemy attitude? In the Hindu tradition, we account for evil not with the argument that human nature is fundamentally defective or flawed and cannot be fixed, but we trace evil, if I use that word, we trace evil to ignorance. In Sanskrit, the word is avidya, ignorance about who we are, about the divine, about the nature of reality. Ignorance is a flawed, defective understanding of the world, the jagat, of oneself, Atma, and of the divine, Ishvara. And this ignorance, avidya, leads to greed, and greed in turn leads to greedful actions, and greedful actions express in ways that are destructive of others and of oneself and generates suffering. So we trace evil, I'm using that word, to this threefold combination: ignorance, greed, and greed-motivated actions that are described in the Upanishads as the three knots of the heart, Hridaya Granthi. So our attitude to the person who is caught in the grip of this ignorance and who expresses this ignorance in evil actions, even when we must oppose such actions, our attitude is one of compassion and not hate. Because we know that avidya, or ignorance, ultimately ends in suffering and in unhappiness, even for the person who is motivated by greed. My third point is related to this second insight. Seeing avidya is an invitation to what I would call looking deeper into the causes of another's conduct. Looking deeper helps to neutralize hate, to free us from the enemy attitude. Consider this. A person who intentionally tells false and negative stories about you may be doing so out of envy for your success, for your achievements. He or she longs for your success but finds it difficult to attain, and this frustration expresses itself in the desire to undermine your success in the eyes of others by telling false stories about you or by creating damaging fiction. Understanding the cause of his or her behavior to be his or her inability to achieve success enables us to control our own reaction of anger and hate and to be understanding. You see that the person's behavior is a product of his or her own predicament and not something for which you are responsible or perhaps for which you could do anything. You see it as a consequence of his or her own life disappointments. It doesn't make the person's actions justified, but it helps to liberate you from hate. It helps you to control your response. The reasons why others might hate us or be hostile to us are complex, and we cannot change them in spite of all of our efforts. But if we look deeper, we might understand their attitude in terms of their own histories, their own biographies, their own experiences, their own frustrations. And so it enables us to respond with freedom from hate. But the difficulty is that our human tendency is usually to react to the immediate word or action and to become personally offended. And then when that happens, we want to hurt the other in the same manner that we have been hurt and become entangled in the web of mutual animosity and in the enemy disposition. So in order to look beyond the word and the action to the underlying cause, we have to break this impulsive and mechanical way of reacting to become more thoughtful and more deliberate in our own responses. We have to always remember that while we are not responsible for the conduct of the other, we are always responsible for our own thoughts, our own words, our own actions, and we must exercise control over these. So an attitude of understanding helps us not to behave like the other. We respond on the basis of our own deeply held values. Let me conclude by saying that Sama Abhuta Ripu, freedom from the enemy attitude, is not weakness. I cannot emphasize that enough. It is an expression of wisdom. It does not mean giving approval to the behavior of another or absolving a person from responsibility. It does not mean that we do not resist or protest against that which we consider to be unjust and to be a cause of suffering to others. It means that we find a way to resist without hate in our hearts. And if we can resist without hate, we are clearer about the reasons for our resistance. There are times when we must resist, but we can always do that without the enemy attitude. And we have very good historical examples to guide us and to inspire us. So let us keep this virtue of the Sant in our minds and our heart, Abhuta Ripu, one who is free, one who is liberated from the enemy attitude. In that sense, the Sant has no enemies because the Sant does not see others as the enemy.